All right, live. So we're going to work with Billy Collins' poem, The Lanyard. So Billy Collins is a modern American poet. He is still alive. He is, daily doing poetry things on social media with the pandemic and everything. He is known because he is well known because he was named Poet Laureate, I think in like 2000, 2001. So we have a position here in our country we name what's called a poet laureate. It's a government position, and the government pays that poet for whatever time they're working for them to just go write and create. And so part of what he decided to do with his money is he sat down and he wrote for an entire year a poem a day and put together like really clear things that teachers could do in school with that poem to be able to help kids. And so it was a really different kind of project. A lot of the poetry he writes is very accessible. It has a really clear voice to it, but it also sort of makes sense to students when we start looking at it. Today's poem that we're going to look at is one of his more famous ones. It's titled The Lanyard. Do you know what a lanyard is? Yeah, I know. Everybody goes, this thing. Yes. I need you to change that perception a little bit. He is going to talk about the lanyards that you would make out of that plastic thread at like a craft piece that you would like weave together and it makes like a boxy little keychain that you could give somebody. So he's going to talk about that as his lanyard. We're going to watch him read the poem. But before we do, I want you to just preview it. Pull the poem up and give it a quick read to yourself. You'll notice it's a little, you might go, oh, this is long. It reads pretty easy. So give it a second to pre-read. Then we're going to watch him read it before we talk about it. All right, everybody good? You had a chance to read it? All right, we're going to turn it to him. You notice this isn't a long video. He's going to read through it. He's going to tell you exactly what's there. Look at how he's going to emphasize, and especially when we look at poets reciting their own work, they know the voice they want to use. They know how they want it read. And so you're going to see him definitely take that on here.
Billy Collins taught college English in the Bronx for 30 years before he became a best-selling poet, one of the few whose books have sold over 200,000 copies, thanks to poems such as this one.
The other day, his eye was ricocheting slowly off the blue walls of this room, bouncing from typewriter to piano, from bookshelf to an envelope lying on the floor. I found myself in the L section of the dictionary, where my eyes fell upon the word Lanyard. No cookie nibbled by a French novelist could send one more suddenly into the past. A past where I sat at a workbench at a camp by a deep Adirondack lake, learning how to braid thin plastic strips into a lanyard, a gift for my mother. I had never seen anyone use a lanyard or wear one, if that's what you did with them. But that did not keep me from crossing strand over strand again and again until I had made a boxy red and white lanyard for my mother. She gave me life and milk from her breasts, and I gave her a lanyard. She nursed me in many a sick room, lifted teaspoons of medicine to my lips, set cold face cloths on my forehead, then led me out into the airy light and taught me to walk and swim, and I in turn presented her with a lanyard. Here are thousands of meals, she said, and here is clothing and a good education. And here is your lanyard, I replied, which I made with a little help from a counselor. Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong legs, bones, and teeth, and two clear eyes to read the world, she whispered. And here, I said, is the lanyard I made at camp. And here, I wish to say to her now, is a smaller gift, not the archaic truth that you can never repay your mother, but the rueful admission that when she took the two-tone lanyard from my hands, I was as sure as a boy could be that this useless, worthless thing I wove out of boredom would be enough to make us even.
Okay. What strikes you about the tone in hearing him read his poem?
He sounds like he doesn't
Very
like his own
monotone.
poem.
He sounds like he doesn't like it. It's really monotone. Do you think there's an intentionality in that monotone delivery?
Probably.
If how many of you were a little surprised when people started laughing at first because you felt like I don't understand the joke? Yeah. Here he is delivering this with a monotone delivery and people start laughing and you go,
It makes it funny.
why? But what makes it funny?
The fact that he's just so like, and here is a lanyard that I made, and you gave me a breathing body.
So what he is doing is what we call understatement. You know the opposite of understatement really well. You know how to overstate things because you probably do it all the time, every day. You make a bigger deal out of every single thing in your life than it should be. Now, we can call the opposite of this, you might be familiar with, a hyperbole. Is that a word you've heard before? So hyperboles are gross over-exaggerations. Pretty much every yo mama joke that's ever been told is an example of a hyperbole. No one's mother is so fat she gets dressed with a boomerang. Doesn't happen. But when we look at understatement, it's really hard to recognize because you notice that we have to do the opposite. If this is an over-exaggeration, this is where you give that delivery that does the opposite of what you want it to do. So he gives that monotone delivery, but if we look down the poem, look at the examples he gives about what his mother did for him. tell me the first example of what he says his mother did for him.
Heart and eyes.
What?
Heart and eyes.
First. Like in the poem, the first in the poem.
Oh, she gave him life and milk and milk.
And then what did he give her? And what does he say about that lanyard? As he talks about it, it doesn't have to be right there, but look at the poem. How does he describe this lanyard?
Useless, worthless thing I wore.
Useless and worthless. He even questions at points. I've never seen anybody use one, but I felt like it was a good gift. Look at how he continues to list things that his mom did. She gave me life. Then he says, she, wiped my forehead. She fed me. She created me. And every time he's like, here's your lanyard. I want you to think back. There's probably something around your house that your parents have kept from when you were young that you just don't understand why it's still there. It could be a craft that you did. Maybe it's a holiday decoration. Maybe at Christmas there's an ornament or something that they've always kept and they put on the tree and you're like, Mom, this is the stupidest thing I've ever made. Like, this is so dumb. Why did you keep this? There's probably something. But when you gave it to them, go back. Did you think it was stupid?
No.
Like, it was the best. You tried your best. I think about when you were in elementary school, did they do the thing where they had like the little store set up and you could go in and buy things and pick things out, and really all you were doing was spending your parents' money, but you didn't really know it? So I remember they did that, and I bought my dad this travel coffee mug that had like old 1920s cars on it. My dad doesn't like cars.
Oh.
Like, it's this giant coffee mug that, even back then there were, you couldn't put it in a cup holder. It didn't work. So it was this like completely useless gift, but I was like, hey, I think my dad would like this. I don't know why. It was brown on beige too. Like, it was just ugly. But you know what? He used that thing for a long time. We all have those relatable moments that we can look at. And when we look at this poem, we go, okay, because what does he say by the end of it?
It was enough.
Huh?
It was enough.
It was enough. What was enough?
That was
He says it was enough to make us even. Is it? No, but why does he feel that way?
Because he doesn't know any better.
Yes, but why does he feel that way? Go a couple lines up about how his mother's reaction is. Because you notice what you're missing here in this line is not that it actually did make them even, and not that it was enough, but that she made him feel like it was enough. It's not legitimate here. We don't see that it's like, oh yeah, this is a fair trade. He describes for us why he thinks it's a fair trade, because he keeps going back to, you gave me these things, and hey man, I made you a lanyard. His words help us to understand it's not enough. But it's not until the end that he gives us that bigger meaning. It's her. She made him feel like this stupid, worthless thing made them even. Everybody with me? So when we look at this poem, notice how we were able to start. We didn't have to start necessarily with speaker and situation anymore because we got those things. We could go, okay, we don't have a lot of details about the speaker, but he uses the first person. We know that it's not Billy Collins, because we've said speaker and poet are two different things. But we can go, I is general. Could be me. We know the situation because it's obvious. It's relatable. And because this is written in words that you can follow, you're going, oh yeah. But notice how we're getting towards meaning. That we have this use of understatement through the poem, and we have lots of other things he's doing too, that help us to understand that, hey, by the end, we're good. What we want to do now that we have a good idea of like, hey, I got it, we start to transition towards, hey, how do we write about this? We're going to use our same 5-sentence model that we've been using to look at, hey, how can we transition to writing about a poem? And we're going to vary it up just a bit. If you look on your Canvas page, you see how we're going to vary it up just a little bit. We're going to extend and help to focus our answer a bit by using one example of a literary technique or device that Billy Collins uses to help to build this meaning. So our 5 sentences are going to break down like this. 1, we're going to answer the question. It's going to be that thesis statement. So we're going to balance it out with, here's the subject, here's what the poem's about, and here's one thing that he does to build that meaning. 2, we're going to prove the meaning with some evidence. Our commentary is going to connect. Hey, how does this proof help us to understand the meaning of the poem? We're going to then pull our technique and be able to say, hey, here's the use of it in the poem. So if it was like a metaphor, we would pull, hey, Billy Collins uses this metaphor to help to build this meaning. And then 5, bless you, we're going to bring that commentary around. So we're more or less going to help to focus to show, hey, if this is the meaning, here's how we create the meaning. So our logic is going to help to develop a little bit more here. Would you like to do this together? Okay, so my suggestion would be have your answer ready to go so that we can type. Maybe split your screen so that you have the poem on the one side, you got your answer screen on the other so that you can type and go. So we said when we do our thesis statements, we want to look at this with a subject and an assertion. And rather than talking about theme, we're going to talk about a technique. So we're going to do 2/3 of the sentence together. And then I'm going to suggest a technique, but I'm going to leave it open for you to also build in, hey, what do you want to do? So we start with our subject in Billy Collins' poem, The Lanyard. So you notice a couple of things here. We put the apostrophe on the S because his name ends in an S. We put the title of the poem in quotation marks, and we follow capitalization rules with it. When we did our revising over A Rose for Emily, we talked about sentences that begin with a subordinate conjunction. I is an example of a subordinate conjunction, so we need a comma here. Because the subject of our sentence is going to be the meaning and the technique. This is introducing that. What would you say the meaning of this poem is? Let me give you the frame. we want to introduce how he builds this meaning. So we can say Collins discusses. What does he discuss?
About her mother?
Huh?
About how her mother loved him.
Yes. We can talk about his mother's love. Is there something specific about that he tries to say through the poem?
You can never repay your mom.
So if we put that out, Collins discusses how you can never repay your mother's love. Because there we're actually saying something, right? We're able to say, hey, here's what it is. And it's going to give us a really easy way to bring in that quote to prove it. And we have one more part of the sentence we're going to have to write, which is this technique. How does he do that? Now, we talked about as one way the use of understatement here. If you don't want to focus on that, you don't have to. Collins uses lots of different things as you go through the poem. We see a use of metaphors. We see a use of imagery as he describes what the lanyard looks like, how it's built, what the task is like. We could even talk about selection of detail. Notice that every time he focuses on things his mother does, each task his mother does is something that's based on caring for him. It's not like it's an expected thing. Your mother doesn't take care of you expecting payment at some point. Well, hopefully not. So if you wanted to talk about selection of detail, you could. There are lots of different things that can go in this next part. What's important about picking the technique is that you can recognize it and that you can talk about the effect. What does it do? If you can just point and go, hey, look, I found a simile. Great. So what? What's that simile doing? How does it help to support this? So in filling out this back part of the sentence, I want you to pick one technique he uses. And so we said it could be understatement, it could be metaphor, it could be selection of detail. It could be anything we've talked about, even something we haven't that you know. We're going to fill in this last part of the sentence with it by saying, through the use of blank. So I'm going to give you a second, pick one of these, finish that first sentence, and we're going to move on to the second sentence in just a moment. All right, so as we move on to the next sentence, we know that we're going to pull in, how do we prove the meaning of the poem? What's a quote that helps us to show that you can never repay your mother's love? Reggie, what you got?
Gifts.
What?
Gifts.
So he gives her what?
No, gifts. A gift.
Yes, he gives her this thing, but we need a quote from the poem. Now, this one might be one that we could also benefit from having a couple of quotes like we did here on the board to kind of show he gives her a useless lanyard, but he assumes it makes them even. Do you see how we can link those two quotes and use that as a way to talk about this? So we could say something like, is it make them even? What's the phrase at the end?
Out of the boredom would be enough to make us eat.
Make us even. Now, since I had to change the word here to make it work grammatically, since we're talking about the speaker in the third person, we can't use us. Us is a first person plural. We change it to them and we put those brackets around it so that it shows we changed it. So we say the speaker assumes that his useless and worthless lanyard is a gift that can make them even. Now, our commentary can bring this together to explain it doesn't. This might mean that we have to bring in some quotes, and that's okay. We want our commentary to link our ideas. We can frame this next sentence to be simple, to say something like, so without using a quote, we can just say, the speaker understands now that he only felt that way because his mother accepted the gift lovingly. Do you see how we're really connecting how this meaning is built in the poem? We're making it clear. How does this quote about making them even and this worthless, useless thing, how does it help us understand that you can't repay your mother's love? We're hitting that point of you can't repay it because it's, I'm giving you this thing that I know is worthless, but I only understand that it's worthless now because you made me feel like it was $1 million when I gave it to you. A couple of things I want to point out as you're typing that I didn't see consistently in what we were turning in. First, notice how the quotes are embedded into our sentence. It's fluid. We don't just stop and say, the speaker said, and then we put like 3 lines there. No. We figure out what's the most important part of the quote that we can pull. And our thinking actually connects back here. Some of you don't get that your thinking has to be circular in nature. If we say that this is the meaning, and we're starting here, our sentences have to loop back together to actually explain why this is the answer. Instead, your logic looks like this. And you're just following it. You're going around and you're like, whoa! And I think it's why we produced paragraphs on the Emily essay that might have started with, the most impactful thing that happened to her was her father's death. And instead of talking about her father, you're going, what? Homer died. Whoa. And you're way over here all of a sudden. We got to remember, if we introduce the idea, we got to come back and connect that thinking to the idea. So our next part is going to talk about, hey, what's the technique you picked? How does it connect? And so if I was going to roll with understatement, I would write it like this. So I'm going to leave a blank for my quote, but I would write, Collins uses understatement to build this meaning by comparing the caring actions his mother took, like, that's where I would pull one from the poem, to his gift of the simple lanyard. So I'm going to give you a second to write this sentence. You can use this part if you want. You just have to fill in the quote. So you can use this if understatement is what you're doing. If you picked metaphor, you're obviously going to have to change this to Collins uses metaphor, a metaphor to build this meaning. But if you're using understatement, you can totally copy this and just fill in the quote here for what your example of understatement is. And again, we're looking at caring actions. So this could be like wiping his brow when he's sick, feeding him, anything. All right. And then once you have this sentence with your example, your proof, we now need to connect it back together. How does this help to show us? And so if we're looking here with this, right, we're focusing on the caring actions his mother took to this simple lanyard. It's a real simple sentence that can connect it back, where we just make clear. You know, we could say, Collins handwriting looks awful. So if we started the sentence by more or less saying Colin's undervaluing of his gift compared to his mother's actions helps to show that, how do we end it? You can never repay your mother's love. I know some of you are like, really? It's that simple? Yeah. It's just about connecting and thinking and making it clear. And so we're not asking you to like reinvent the wheel. We're just looking for you to clearly express how you're getting the ideas that you have. How are we going to take this forward tomorrow? Tomorrow we are going to have you individually write a response like this over one poem we have studied in the last few days. So you can go back to Dream Deferred, you can go back to No Frigate Like a Book, The Eagle, any of the Meeting at Night, any of those that you understand best, and we're going to write 5 sentences on it. This lets us see, hey, how well can you do with this task on your own? Because next week we're going to fold in research. We're going to have 6 poems on the table, so you get the chance to choose one that you like best. We're going to write a response, and then we're going to add in some outside research. So we're going to talk about not just how to read a research piece, but also how to quote it, how to cite it, how to create a works cited page. So we're going to do a couple other things with it as we get into next week. So before you leave, make sure you have this submitted and finished. If you have questions, ask.